Today we're going to speak about Dalet Kosot. So why do we drink Dalet Kosot Beleil HaSeder? There are two fundamental approaches in the Rishonim. It's not exactly two, it's three or four. But that is why I say two fundamental approaches. And one of the two is split into three different interpretations. One is, it's all about derech remez. So Rashi and the Rashbam in the very beginning of Perek Arba Psocham Daf Tzadik Tes Amid Beis, and the Rashbam is also on Bava Basra Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis, Keneged Daled Lishoyin Shel Geulo. Voitzeise v'itzalti velokachti v'goalti velokachti, and that is the most commonly quoted reason for Dalet Kosot. Rashi, Rashbam, many Rishonim, and most of the Achronim, Keneged Dalet Lishoyin Shel Geulo that we find at the beginning of Parshas Ve'ero. Rashi, the Kuf Ches, says another remez. Dalet Kosot in the dream of the Sarah Mashkin. In Yerushalmi we find Dalet Kosot Shel Poronus and Dalet Kosot Shel Yeshuvo. So all these three interpretations are b'derech remez. But a Tosfos in Sukkah Daf Lamed Ches, and I'm quoting the Lashon of Tosfos, Mistome lo yitiknu Dalet Kosot elo kedei loymar aleihem halel v'hagoda. And that's a fundamentally different approach than Rashi, the Rashbam, and all the others I quoted just a moment ago. Beleil HaSeder, we say four brachas. Kiddush, Berachas HaGeula, Berachas HaMazoin, and Berachas HaHalel. And the Dalet Kosot are, so each and every one of these brachas has its kos, a kos shel bracha. So the lesson of Tosfos, Sukkah Lamed Ches, Mistome lo yitiknu Dalet Kosot ele kedei loyma aleim halel v'hagoda. Halel v'hagoda includes the entire Haggadah, starting off with Kiddush, including Berachas HaMazoin. And that is also found in the Ran, Beresh Perek Arvei Psochim. So Briskerov, the Rosh Medabrim in the Sugya of Dalet Kosot, and as I connected, I saw on the screen Grizel Rambam Perek Zayin Hilchos Chometz Matzah. So the Briskerov has a lengthy discussion, and he brings two different approaches, two different opinions. Is the mitzvah of Dalet Kosot Shtiyas Dalet Kosot, or just what we say and recite on the Dalet Kosot? Is it what we say on the Kosot, or is Shtiyas HaKosot? And the Briskerov wants to explain. That is the Suffolk of Tosfos in the beginning of Arba Psochim. Tzadik Tesa Mesechah Psochim. Tosfos is Mesupik. Does only the Balabayas, the one that fears the Seder, is he the only one that needs Dalet Kosot? Or is it each and every member of the family needs his own Dalet Kosot? And Tosfos is Mesupik. Tosfos concludes everyone needs Dalet Kosot, but it's mashman the lesson of Tosfos. It's not because it's not a definitive conclusion, but rather kach ra'ui lasot. That is our minig. That is the right thing to do, and it's mashman from Tosfos. It's still a suffix, but lamaisa, that is what we do. So the Briskerov says, the suffix of Tosfos is Dalet Kosot about Shtiyas HaKosot, or is it all about saying the brachas al HaKosot? And to me, it's a shtickle pella. As a person that learned Perek Arba Psochim 100 times, and I say 100 times just for derech hafloga, I don't count. Some people are surprised when they say, I don't know how many times I finished Shas. I really don't know. I don't count. Why should one count? What is the nafka mina? We learn. We finish Masechtas, we finish Shas, and every time it's a gavaldige simcha. Why would one need to count? So I learned many times Arba Psochim, and it seems to me a milsa de pshita. that there's a chiyuv of shtiyas dalet koises. This could be no suffix. That cannot be the suffix of Tosfos. So 3 times in Perek Arba Psachim do we find the Lashon of Chazal, dalet koises tiknu chachamim derech cherus. What does derech cherus mean? Derech cherus means shtiyas koises derech cherus. Derech cherus manifests itself only in shtiyas koises. You need to drink the wine derech cherus, primarily meaning heseba. Heseba on your left side. Saying the Haggadah, there is no derech cherus. The Shloach Kodesh says, one should not say the Haggadah be'heseba. Definitely not Kiddush. You don't say Kiddush be'heseba. You don't say Berchas HaMazon be'heseba. So what does it mean? Dalet koises tiknu chachomim derech heseba. That's Kuf Chesom mit Beis, Kuf Tesom mit Beis, Kuf Yud Zayin mit Beis, 3 times in Perek Arba Psachim. So the Rambam clearly says twice, Perek Zayin, Halacha Zayin, and Halacha Ches. So the Rambam in Halacha Zayin says the fundamental idea of Heseba is B'chol dorei v'dorei chayav odom l'eres esatzmo kilu hu zeh sheyotzo miMitzrayim ulefichach tiknu chachamim. That when a person eats and drinks, oichel v'shloisa b'layla zeh tzorach lechol v'nishlois v'meisav derech cherus beheseba. So Heseba is the reflection and the manifestation of B'chol dorei v'dorei chayav odom l'eres esatzmo kilu hu zeh sheyotzo miMitzrayim. And the Rambam writes, when is Heseba ma'akav? B'achilas matzah and b'shtiyas dalet koises. So the Rambam clearly says dalet koises about shtiyah. But we can't ask a kasha on the Rambam, a kasha on Tosfos from the Rambam. Tosfos and the Rambam were b'nei dor echad. Some of the Bala Tosfos were even before the Rambam. But that is why I quote the Gemara. So the Rambam Perek Zayin, let's have a look at Halacha Zayin and Halacha Ches. Okay, here we are. Tzorach lechol v'lishtois v'umeisav derech cherus. Kol echod v'yechod. V'enoshim chayev lishtois b'laylo was Arba koises. And then in Halacha Ches, the Rambam goes on. Afili onishim v'sul lo echal ad sheyesev. V'eimosai tzorach heseba. Towards the end of Halacha Ches. V'eimosai tzrichen heseba. B'shas achiles kazayis matzu ub'shtiyas Arba koises hu eilu. Shar achilos v'shtiyos im heisa v'reis mishubach v'im lo einoi tzorech. So in the Rambam it is clear the dalet koises is about shtiyah, but I think nobody could dispute that because that is the concept of derech cherus, as the Rambam defines tzorech lechol v'lishtos. The first line in the Rambam on our page. Tzorech lechol v'lishtos v'hu meisav derech cherus. Derech cherus is not reflected only ba'achir v'shtiyah. And if 3 times in Perek Arba Psachim, dalet koises tiknu rachmona derech cherus, and a Heseba is ma'akiv, then there definitely is a mitzvah of shtiyah. So what is the suffix of Tosfos? So I need to explain 2 things. First of all, the suffix of Tosfos. And so what is Tosfos mesupik? So I want to explain the different approaches of the Rishonim, what dalet koises is about, and then the suffix of Tosfos. So Bashkofa Rishonim, when we learn the Chakir of the Brisker Rav, is dalet koises about drinking dalet koises shel yayin, or is it rather about the brachas? Efshar, that it's total. What is the reason for dalet koises? So according to Tosfos and Sukkah and the Ran, it's about the brachas. Tosfos says, "Mistomer loy tiknu dalet koises elo kedei loymar aleim halel v'agod." And I think the Brisker Rav quotes Tosfos. So according to Tosfos, it's about the brachas, not about drinking. But of dalet koises are keneged dalet koises shel paroi shel saramashkin, or dalet koises shel paronos, or dalet lishona shel geula, then probably it's a mitzvah of shtiyas dalet koises. But I say no. I proved from the Gemaras, not only from the Rambam, from the Gemaras. Dalet Koises is definitely a chiyuv of shtir. So what is the suffix of Taisus? So in Taisus, I have a Mishnah Rishoina and a Mishnah Achroina. Whenever I have two Mahalchim, I leave the Ikar Mahalach as the second one. Because if I'm going to say Ikar de Milsa first, then people will ask, then why do you say the second, which is not Ikar? So I start off with the one that is Einoi Ikar Be'einai. So in the Mishnah, the very beginning of Arba Psucham, Afila Oni Yisrael, Lo Yifchesu Loi Medaled Koises. So even the poor and the desperate that don't have enough money, we need to give them, supply them Dalet Koises from the Tamchui, from Kaspei Tzipor, from the communal tzedakah funds. Usually, we don't give tzedakah only for a person's necessities. We don't give aniyah money to buy an esrog and a lulav or to build a sukkah. The Tamchui supplies food for the needy and the desperate. Of course, it's a mitzvah to help a poor man buy a lulav, but that is not from the Tamchui. The Tamchui is designated to feed hungry people. So why do we give Dalet Koises? So Taisa says, Persume Nisa. On one hand, it's food, it's drinks, but it's not exactly what the poor man needs. The poor man could drink water. He doesn't need wine. He needs wine to be Mekayim a mitzvah. So why is that different than a lulav or an esrog or a sukkah? The Tamchui doesn't give money for mitzvahs. The Tamchui gives food. So on one hand, it's food, and it's Persume Nisa. So Taisa says the reason we give is Persume Nisa. So my Mishnah Rishoina is this. Shnei dinim bedalet koises. And maybe his dad is really what the Briskerov means. Because the Briskerov remembered Arba Psuchim better than I do. And he probably learned Arba Psuchim more times than I did. So I assume the Gemaras that I quote the Briskerov knew better than me. So my interpretation of the Briskerov would be, yes, Shnei dinim bedalet koises. What is more fitting for the Briskerov than Shnei dinim? One din is the chiyuv to drink Dalet Koises. And the other din is to say the Agod ala Kois mishum Persume Nisa. And Persume Nisa is associated with dibur, not with drinking. What you eat and drink is not Persume Nisa. Persume Nisa is saying the Haggadah and saying Hallel. Everybody eats and drinks for himself. But the essence of Persume Nisa is for others. And that is why we like Ner Chanukah Pesach Beisur B'Bechutz Mishum Persume Nisa. We read the Megillah B'Tzibur Mishum Persume Nisa. Eating matzah is not Persume Nisa. It's a Zeicher L'Nes, but not Persume Nisa. Drinking Dalet Koises is not Persume Nisa. The Persume Nisa is saying Halal v'Hagod on the Dalet Koises. And maybe that's Pshat and Toises. So Toises would agree, everybody needs to drink Dalet Koises. But when we supply Dalet Koises from the Tamchui, we don't give a lulav from the Tamchui. We don't give an esrog. We give food for the needy, for the desperate, and also for Persume Nisa. So Toises argues, from the Tamchui, we would only give for the Balabayas, because he is the one that says the Haggadah. And in the days of the Mishnah and the Gemara, the minig was that the father, the Balabayas, said the Haggadah, and he was moitzi all the others. That's a Gemara for Reshes Daf Kuf Tazayin Amid Beis in Masechet Psachim. Rav Ashi said the Haggadah, and no one else in his family, and that was the common minig going back to the days of Chazal. Many Gedolei Yisrael had that minig, including the Gra. Today, in most of our homes, everybody, all the family, men, women, everybody says the Haggadah. So maybe Tosis means to say, when we give Dalet Koisis for a family from the Tamchud, we don't give for everyone, only for the Balabais. Why? Because for all the others, it's just a mitzvah like any other mitzvah. For the Balabais, it's Pirsum and Issa, because he is the one that will say Halal Vagod. So that's my Mishnah Rishoina. However, the Loshen of Tosis, Mashmit Fei, even though the Dibur HaMaschil is lo yifchesu lo Arba koises, but I think in the Hemshech of Tosis is mashma, the Tosis is mesupik in the very essence of Dalet koises. Does everybody need Dalet koises, or is it only the Balabais? Look at the last line in Tosis. V'nere lahachmi v'lahatzlech Arba koises lekolechod. V'nere lahachmir ulahatzlech Arba koises lekolechod. It is not only nere lahachmi v'lit menatam chui, so it's more mashma in Tosis that the suffix of Tosis is not only when we supply wine from the tamchui, from a communal fund that is designated to help the needy and the desperate. The suffix in Tosis is an ikar mitzvahs dalat koises. So how do I understand the suffix? So the way I understand it is this: Shnei dinam medalat koises. Going back to what I said a few moments ago. Shnei dinam medalat koises. There's a chiyuv to drink dalat koises, and there's a chiyuv to say the 4 brochas, each one ala kois. The question is, ma ikar v'ma tofel. I actually don't like to use the word tofel in Lamdis and halacha. Nothing in Yiddishkeit is tofel. Tofel has somewhat of a negative connotation. So the Hagdoras I use, ma shorish v'ma anaf. What is the ikar and what is nilve elo? What is yoitza min ha'ikar? So let me explain. Was the ikar takona drinking dalat koises? And the secondary takona was, if we're drinking dalat koises, we might as well have each and every brocha have its own kois. And those dalet koises that Chachoma Mu'atak and we need to drink should also be koisel brocha. So the original tekona was Chai Vodam Lishas dalet koises. And the Tosefes was, we might as well disperse those dalet koises, spread them out to say halal ala kois, hagod ala kois, kiddush ala kois, and berachas hamazon ala kois. Or maybe it goes the other way around. The ikar tekona was kois shel bracha. But contrary to any other kois shel bracha, kiddush berachas hamazon, it is only chibuv mitzvah that we drink the kois. Me'ikar din kois shel bracha, you don't need to drink. Drinking from the kois shel bracha is only chibuv, is only hidu mitzvah, chibuv mitzvah. But by dalit koises, it's a chiyuv. So was the ikar tekona drinking or saying halal v'hagada? Everybody agrees that it's shnei dinim. Both are a chiyuv. The question was, what was the primary tekona and what is the secondary tekona? What is the ikar? What is the tofel? What is the shorish and what is the anav? What's the root and where do they branch out? That is the suf. So first of all, it's miyashev kuli alma moedim dalat koises tikla chachamim derech erus. You need to drink dalat koises beheseba. But we also say halal v'agod and dalat koises, and each kois has its own brocha. Kiddush, hagoda, halal, and berachas hamazon. So if we say the ikar takona is the brachas, then the chiyuv shtir is only incumbent. It's only upon the one that says halal v'agoda. And if the father says halal v'agoda, if the balabais is the only one to say halal v'agoda, then he is the only one that has chiyuv shtir, because the ikar takona is halal the Haggadah. And so the Chiyuv Shtir is Nimshach al Yedei Ikar HaChiyuv. But if the Ikar HaChiyuv is Shtir's Dalet Koises, then everybody needs Dalet Koises. Afen Hoya B'Yoisei Anes. Afen Hoya B'Yoisei Anes. So if the primary Tikkun was Shtir's Dalet Koises, then each and every member of the family needs Dalet Koises, even if they're not saying the Haggadah. The Barabais is saying the Haggadah, but they're Yoitza with his brachas, and that is why they all need Dalet Koises. So my interpretation of the Suffolk of Taisus would be, what was the Ikar Takana, and what is Nilva Eilav? So now I have a Chiddush, and to me this is so appealing. On our screen we have the Taisus, and as I quoted at the beginning of the Shiur, this Taisus starts with a suffix. Metoich haloshen mashma k'tzah shein asan lebon avram beisoy kiem liatzmoy bo moitzes kil mishaloi v'svorei mashnu dalet koises mikiddush. However, Taisus mesupik. So Taisus concludes nera lahachmir v'lahatzlecha v'koises lechol lechol. So Taisus seems to be in doubt. It's still a suffix. I think this suffix is the same suffix as Taisus we quoted, Sukkah Lamed Ches. Sukkah Lamed Ches, the lotion of Taisus is Mistomer loy tiknu dalet koises, loimer aleim halal v'haggadah. Mistomer. It's likely. It's reasonable. That's the lotion of Taisus, Sukkah Lamed Ches. Mistomer loy tiknu dalet koises, loimer aleim halal v'haggadah. So the suffix in Taisus is the same suffix, sukkah and psachim. So Taisus sukkah means to say the primary reason for dalet koises is halal v'haggadah. But Taisus agrees that there's a chiyuv shtir, but that is the secondary takana. So what I argue is the suffix in Taisus in psachim is the same suffix as Taisus in sukkah. What is ikar and what is nilva eilav? I just want to make a very fundamental point. So I just explained that the suffix, whether everybody needs dalet koises or only the barabais, depends what is the ikar takana. There's room to argue now, even if we do assume the ikar takana was halal v'haggadah, there's still a reason to say that everybody needs dalet koises. Why? It is true, only the Balabayas will say halal v'haggadah, but he is moitzi all the others. And all the others are yoitza mit shomei ha'koina. So there's room to argue, if you're yoitza with shomei ha'koina, you also need a kois. Because it is your kois shel brocha as well. And this would be mitlet talia, would depend on how we define the concept of shomei ha'koina. So on a few different sources in my Sforim, I wrote about shomei ha'koina. So there's a very famous machlokes between the Beis Halevi and the Chazon Ish. How do we define shomei ha'koina? The Beis Halevi has a gewaltige chiddush. And he says, by Birchas Koyanim, shomei ha'koina doesn't apply. So if all the koyanim are oile leduchan, and only one kohen says Birchas Koyanim, Yivarech Hashem Yishmecho, and all the others are mechaven to be yoitza with him, does that work? Is that valid? Beis Halevi says no. Why? Because Birchas Koyanim, a kohen needs to say B'kol Ram. Shomei is koina, but Shomei is not koina b'koil ram. So the aside of the Beis Halevi is, whenever there are specifics, how you need to say, Shomei koina doesn't work. Shomei koina is only the most fundamental aniyah. Shomei koina, but Shomei is not koina b'koil ram. The Rogatchover comes up with the same idea. And he says, what is the origin of the minhag that Every member in Shiur says a Seres B'nai Haman on his own. What is the makor? What's the reasoning? The Rogatchover says, because a Seres B'nai Haman, you need to say B'neshima Achas. Shemea Ka'oina, but Shemea is not Ka'oina B'neshima Achas. So the svara of the Beis Halevi Koil Ram is the same svara as the Rogatchover, B'neshima Achas. Chazon Ish doesn't bring the Rogatchover. He was a contemporary. But the Chazon Ish, in his famous kuntras on Shemea Ka'oina, disagrees with the Beis Halevi. And he writes, Shemea Ka'oina is not pshat that it is as if I am saying, but rather I am yotze with what you are saying. So the understanding of the Chazon Ish and the Beis Halevi is, when I hear, it is as if I am saying. So Shemea Ka'oina, but it's not Ka'oina b'Kol Ram. It's not Ka'oina b'Neshima Achas. But of the interpretation of Shemea Ka'oina is somewhat similar to Shlichus. Don't quote me saying Shemea Ka'oina is Metam Shlichus. That's Amaratzis. But it is similar to Shlichus in the way that, just like by Shlichus, I am Yotze with his mitzvah, I am Yotze with his baruch. So in my kuntras on Shemea Ka'oina, Minchas Osher and Chumash Bamidbar, and Minchas Osher Moedim, I brought, I think, 35 sources, Lakan or Lakan, from the Rishonim and the Poskim Rishonim and Achronim. It's an amazing kuntras. I think it's about 34 or 35 sources. And then, at the end, they came up with a third interpretation, Shaloka Chazon Ish Veloka Beis Halevi. But that's another sugi. What I mean to say regarding the suffix of Tosfos and Psochim, there's room to argue Koli Alma Moedim that the Ikar Dalet Koisis is Halal V'Hagoda. But the suffix of Tosfos is, how do we understand Shemea Ka'oina? If Shemea Ka'oina is said, I am Yotze with his Hagoda, then I don't need a kois. He needs the kois, and I'm Yotze with his Hagoda. But if it is considered as if I am saying the same, so where's your kois? Your bracha needs to be a koisel bracha. So there's room to say pshat, the suffix of the Tosfos is not what is the ikar mitzvah of dalet koises. Is it halal v'agoda or shtiyas hakoises? But rather, maybe everybody agrees it's halal v'agoda. But the suffix is in the interpretation of Shemea Ka'oina. Yoiser neder lani es daiti. The first pshat that I said. Everybody agrees, Shnei Dinim Dalet Koises. It's not very common that I say Shnei Dinim. But there is Shnei Dinim Dalet Koises. Kulan Moedim Shtiyas HaKoises. You need to drink Dalet Koises. And on the other hand, you need to say Halal V'Hagoda B'Dalet Koises. The question is, what is the Ikar Takana and what is the secondary Takana? My Ikar V'Matovel. And the same suffix is in Sukkah and in Psochim. This brings us to another Chiddush of the Brisker Rav. So the Ramon Siman Tov Pei Gimel says, B'shas Atchak we could be Yotze Dalet Koises with Chamar Medina. If you don't have wine, it could be Chamar Medina. Tov Pei Gimel Sif Aleph. Says the Brisker Rav, Shtiyas HaKoises, you cannot be Yotze with Chamar Medina. Shtiyas HaKoises needs to be Yayin. Dalet Koises shel Yayin. However, so on the screen, we have the din of Chamar Medina. Beliner de linien Arba Koises Shlis Moichaman de Yom de Mekatson al Shah Mashke Nimo Chamar Medina Kemotion is Bayal El Besimin Reish Ayin Beis. במקום משנוהגים לשתות משקה נעשה מדבש, שקודם מעיד, יוכל לקחויסי משקה ליער בקויסס, המין לא יין. Yes, Shoimim Shein Oisin Kiddush Shal Mashkin. However, the Ramo says not only the other three koises, even Kiddush you could use. Chama Medina. Briskerov says Chama Medina is only good for saying Halav Agodim on the Yain. Aval Shtiyas Yain needs to be Yain. So the story goes that in the midst of World War I, when most of the Kehilas in Eastern Europe were uprooted, and hundreds of thousands of Jews went into exile, from one city to the other. And the Briskerov and the entire family, the Chaim's family, were not at home, not in Brisk. In his later years, the Briskerov was in Warsaw, was in Varsha, and there was no wine. Wine costed a fortune. And there was a machlokes between the Briskerov and his brother Reb Moshe. What's preferable? Should one family member have yayin, or maybe all of them should have shar mashkin, chamar medina? Reb Moshe Soloveitchik argued, why should one be makayim a mitzvah and a mufchar, and all the others shouldn't have dalat koises at all? Preferable that everybody drinks Chamar Medina, Shar Mashkin. In Minchas Osher, in Moyadim, there's a lengthy discussion in Hilchas Chanukah. It is clear in the Mishnah Berurah and many other Achrayim. If a person has enough Shemen Psilis to be Mahadrim and Mahadrim, but his neighbor has nothing, then you are supposed to forego the Hidur and be mezaki your neighbor to be makayim at least the fundamental mitzvah. So you need to be mevata on some of your shemen, some of your oil, some of your wicks. You're not going to have mahadrim and a mahadrim. At least your neighbor could be makayim the mitzvah of Chanukah. So the Moshe Soloveitchik's argument was, why should one have a mitzvah and a mufta and the others nothing? So we should all drink Chamar Medina. Briskerov said no. And that's a spark of genius, Briskerov l'shitosa. And he says, Shnei dinim, b'dalat koises. Chamar Medina, you could only be yoitza, the brochas ala kois. It's a kosher brocha, halal v'agodim. But you can't be yoitza mitzvah shtiyah. So l'shitosa, the Briskerov says, if the barabayas or the father has yayin, he's moitzi all the others with kosher bracha, with halal v'haggadah. So what's the problem? Even if they drink Chamar Medina, they don't have the mitzvah of Shtiyah. Shtiyah's dalat koises is only yayin. If we all buy Chamar Medina, well, we'll all have the mitzvah of halal v'haggadah ala kois, but no one will have the mitzvah of Shtiyah's dalat koises. If the father has wine, at least he has the mitzvah of Shtiyah's dalat koises. And all the others are yoitza halal v'agoda ala kois, because he is moitzi them. So that's the genius of the Briskerov. Ani lekisha'atzmi. Pashtus haloshen shel haramo is clear as daylight. The Ramo doesn't go into the shnei dina medalat koises. And it is clear from the Ramo and from the Rishonim that he quotes, and that is the Maharil. The Maharil Sosam Velo Piresh. You could be Yoitze Dalet Koises with Chamar Medina. Dalet Koises in its entirety. Lo Kedivrei Hagriz. So the Maharil writes, just like the Maharil quotes, B'mekoymes shenoyagam lishtois mashka nasa medvashe koyren meid yochalika koyse mashka liarbe koyse semein lo yayin. You could be Yoitze. And that means you could be yoitze the mitzvah of dalet koises, lo lemachatza, lo lishlish, lo leravia, but rather the entire mitzvah. And therefore, I would say that Moshe Soloveitchik was right. We all will be mekayim, both chalokim of the mitzvah, shtiyas dalet koises and brocha ala kois. So, this is a fascinating vikuach between two Gedolim, the Briskerov and his brother, Reb Moshe. My last comment in today's Shiur would be a question that the Rashash deals with, I think, in Psochim Daf Kuf Ches. So Dalet Koises is a mitzvah. If you can't have Dalet Koises, is there a mitzvah having 2 or 3 or even 1? Or it's either the entire package or nothing. The Maharal in Gvuras Hashem, Perek Mem Tes, the Maharal says Dalet Koises is 1 mitzvah. And if you can't have Dalet Koises, then you don't have the mitzvah. That's the opinion of the Maharal in Perek Mem Tes. The Maharal is a big marach. I doubt I will find it, in just a Skufa Rishoina, and I don't like to look. I think it's in the continuation of what we have on the screen. But anyway, the Maharal says, Mikshu Achas. From the Magen Avraham, we could prove differently. Magen Avraham, Tov Ayin Beis Sif Yud. The Magen Avraham deals with the question, Shnei Zdorim, Chutz La'aretz, and a person only has Dalet Koises. Should he take 2 koises for the first night and 2 koises for the second night? Or take all the koises for the first night? Magen Avraham says, Leil Kamo Ikar. So he takes all the 4 koises for the first night. We can learn from the Magen Avraham. If not the Leil Kamo Ikar, we would probably split the Dalet Koises. So, but if you split the Dalet Koises, 2 first night, 2 second night, you don't have a mitzvah at all. Because Dalet Koises ma'akvim zeh. So we could prove from the Magen Avraham, Dalet Koises are not me'akiv zeh and zeh. Ibididi Talia, I would say, the answer is very pashut. Regarding the mitzvah of shtiyas Dalet Koises, maybe the Dalet Koises are mi'akiv zeh. But regarding the brachas, definitely not. So if you don't have Dalet Koises, you won't say Kiddush ala Kois. Kiddush ala Kois is a chiyuv every Shabbos and every Yom Tov. So if you don't have Dalet Koises, why wouldn't you say Berachas Hamazon ala Kois? Berachas Hamazon ala Kois we do whenever we have a Zimun, Shabbos. Even if you don't have a Zimun, you could say Berachas Hamazon ala Kois. So coming back to the fundamental idea I said before, Shnei Dinam B'Dalet Koises. So I think the question, are Dalet Koises Ma'akvim Zeh is only relevant regarding Shtiyas HaKoises. But the brachas, Kepashtes Loshan HaGamora Daf Kuftes Daf Kufi Zayin, Dalet Koises Tiknu Chachomim Derecheres, Kol Choda V'Choda Le'eved Bo Mitzvah. Each of them has its own mitzvah, but they all are derecheres. So I think if you don't have Dalet Koises, how do we choose? If you only have 1 kois Kiddush, you have 2, Kiddush and Berachas Hamazon. You have 3, Haggadah, and then Hallel. That's my pshat. Kiddush is number 1, Berachas Hamazon number 2, and Haggadah is more important than Hallel. Haggadah 3, Hallel 4. So, my dear friends, this is what I wanted to share with you on Dalet Koises.